I'm going to play one more clip from that exchange, this one dealing with the conflicts of interest.
The next thing I would say to you, and say it very, very clearly, is I behaved with the...
You don't think you should have recused yourself when you asked Lehman to go in bankruptcy? You didn't put Bear Stearns in bankruptcy, and then you folded Merrill Lynch into... I mean, isn't there some point where you got to say, hey, I got a conflict of interest here? You don't feel any kind of scintilla of ethics on this thing at all?
Totally. I operated very consistently within the ethic guidelines I had as Secretary of the Treasury, and when it became clear that we had some very significant issues with Goldman Sachs and with
why didn't you recuse yourself
with Morgan Stanley. What I did then, it would have been very wrong for me to recuse myself. What I did was I went and got a waiver from the ethics agreement, because when we had concerns...
Who is in charge of the ethics agreement?
What?
Who's in charge of the ethics agreement that you got a waiver?
We have a office of ethics at Treasury, and we have a White House ethics office.
So you got it from the legal counsel from the White House?
We got it from the government ethics office.
The gentleman's time has expired.
What about that, Rand, when you listen to that? Isn't that the problem with government today? Because I've listened to so many of your speeches or your talks or your appearances on TV or wherever, and you talk about the corruption in government. And what about these conflicts of interest? Isn't that the whole problem with Washington today?
Yeah, and it's not just with the Fed and with the Treasury. You've got a revolving door from all kinds of large corporations who get multi-million-dollar corporations. Look at Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, made hundreds of millions of dollars from Halliburton, and then he was back in government. And remarkably, his opinions changed on the war in the mid-'90s. He was justifying why it would be a bad idea to go into Iraq. He went to work for Halliburton, then he came back, and all of a sudden he's justifying why it's a good idea to go into Iraq, and Halliburton got a $1 billion no-bid contract. So, yeah, I think there needs to be limits on people going in and out of government, from corporate head to government, particularly when the corporations are on the receiving end of large federal contracts.
Let's talk about how capitalism is falsely being blamed for the crisis. The media, rather than blaming the elite banking interest, and the Fed is trying to blame capitalism at times for this crisis, and that is patently false. And I know you feel that way, but you made a statement, interest rates were kept artificially low, was the quote that caught my attention. And this was from a speech that you gave at the Boston Tea Party from 2008. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit? The fact that capitalism is being blamed for this, and that's not really the real truth behind this.
Yeah, I think we've been having this debate since the 1930s even. What caused the Great Depression? Was it capitalism or government? And, we had the Federal Reserve even back then. And there's some interesting analogies between the Great Depression and now, in the sense that many economists will say there wasn't much price inflation in the 20s, but there sure was real estate appreciation, and there also was a great stock market bubble. But general prices weren't going up. Kind of what you had again between the period of time of 2001 and 2008. You didn't have significant consumer price index increases, but you did have significant housing price increases, 10, 15, 20% a year sometimes. You also had significant appreciation of assets such as oil and gold, but you didn't have general price inflation. So, I think we need to look at what the causes are and not to blame it on capitalism. We need to blame it on basically where the blame should lie, and that's with the Federal Reserve controlling the price of money. If interest is the price of money, you can't really argue that it's a free market when the price of money is being manipulated and controlled by the Federal Reserve. I often tell people that interest rates are like insulin, or they should be like insulin in the marketplace. As the economy heats up and there's more demand and bidding for money, the interest rates will rise, and they will have sort of a natural tamponading effect, or a homeostasis, kind of the maintenance of a balance occurs. And so when your interest rate is 0%, all products, all projects, all capital investment will begin. But when interest rates are 10%, maybe only the best projects, the ones that have a chance of paying back 10% interest, so you'll have a slowing of the economy as interest rates rise. And if this is allowed to be done naturally, interest rates, they are a great barometer in the economy and keep the economy from growing too fast or too large. But if you keep them at 0%, you create huge bubbles that eventually there will be repercussions and a correction.
You talked in some of your speeches about the Roman Empire quite a bit, and at the end of an empire, they would placate the Romans as they were looting the country, as they were looting the empire and the treasury. And you mentioned cash for clunkers as an example of that. Two things here, Rand. Is the country being looted? And are we placating U.S. citizens as that's going on, as they're looting? Are they sort of placating us with these little throwing bread at the crowd kind of thing?
Yeah, and I think we're tinkering at the edges, and it's a distraction. You know, cash for clunkers, you can't meet any individual, even with a high school education on the street, who believes that cash for clunkers is going to work. I mean, nobody believes you can print up money, give it to you, and then you're supposed to go to the mall or go to the car dealer and buy something. If that would work, why wouldn't we do it all the time? Why wouldn't we give thousands of dollars to people? And I think the American people are smart enough to know that that isn't real. But you do give people money, they will take it, as long as the money has some value. But ultimately what will happen through all of these shenanigans is the money will lose its value. The only question is it going to be a slow erosion or whether or not we might face a catastrophic erosion of the value of the dollar?
I just have three more quick items for you here, and maybe it's not justified to make it quick on these, but you graduated Duke Medical. You've been a practicing physician for quite some time. What are your thoughts on this health care proposal that they were trying to rush and push through?
I think it would be a disaster for us. I think the first question you have to ask is whether or not the problems we face in healthcare are too much government involvement or too little government. Most of the Obama-type plans that are out there, they all believe that the answer is more government. I would argue that the problems we face in healthcare currently are because we have too much government involvement already. Over 55% of what I do is already paid for by the government. All of the people on Medicare and Medicaid have fixed prices, so there is no price mobility. Prices don't go up and down. So really what we need to do is figure out how to go to a healthcare system where you not only have private ownership and profit, but you have to have mobility of prices. The only way you get that is through something with higher deductibles and multi-year policies. So, for example, the answer to portability and pre-existing conditions would all be answered if you would make health insurance more like term life insurance. With term life insurance, I have a 20-year plan, and if I have a heart attack and survive, my term life insurance doesn't go up because I've got a 20-year contract and they can't go up. But if my health insurance, if I have a heart attack and survive, I only have a 1-year plan, they'll double and triple my rates. Even my current rates, and I'm not using my health insurance much because I have a high deductible, they're going up at 17% a year. But Congress is missing the debate. Congress is driving this whole debate on access to health care when in reality the problem is expense of health care. And the reason why health care is so expensive is because there is no competition, no price competition, and no mobility of prices.
Last two things here. There is no way to read these bills before they vote. That was a line from one of your speeches, and you may have said that a number of times. Isn't it disturbing, Rand, because you bring this up, that there's an 1,100-page bill that gets put out by God only knows who's behind it, the special interest groups and whoever. We don't want to get into that right now. And that the lawmakers are supposed to vote on it by noon the next day. What's happening with our government? How did we get here?
You know, a big part of what's going on with the Tea Party movement and all these different protests is that people want reform of their government. They want to have congressmen who are passing legislation that's been written by congressmen and read by congressmen. And not only are they not reading it, they're not even writing it. Half the time the special interests are writing it. When the bank bailout bill came back, there were members of Congress who had lobbyists calling them saying, what are you going to do about Section 42B? And the congressman would say, well, we haven't seen the bill yet. And the lobbyists would say, well, we've got a copy of it. So the lobbyists have the bill before the congressmen and are often in charge of writing the bills. And it's a crime. But I think American people are fed up with it. If we can get some good candidates out there who will talk about these issues, I think we could throw some of the rascals out and bring them home.